I'm Ashley Harrison. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the curatorial director for our inaugural edition of Design Miami Los Angeles. Thank you. As part of our mission, we've been putting together programming and talks to educate and kind of delve into these various areas of design. We've been working with Architectural Digest, who is our lead sponsor for the Design Talk series. And we're finishing up our talk series with one that I think is going to be my personal favorite, Fireside Chat with Mayor Russ, the West Coast editor of Architectural Digest. And let me think if I can remember all of this. Emmy Award-winning, Tony Award-winning, Golden Globe and Peabody Award-winning screenwriter, director, and producer, Ryan Murphy. So I could talk for hours on how wonderful it's been to collaborate with you and how big of a supporter of design Ryan is, but I'm going to leave that for Mayor.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Can you just let Pam in?
Oh, Pam.
Pam Sham is.
Let everybody in.
Yeah, come on. You're holding up the whole thing here. You're holding up the whole thing here. There's a couple. There's one for Sonia. The boys can. You can just sit right here on the lovely. Yeah. You want to come sit right here? Come on, Rez. Yeah, everybody's at a chavek. Okay, thank you all for coming. Wow, it's Sunday, and I was like, nobody's coming to this damn thing. I'm so excited to be talking to Hollywood polymath, Ryan Murphy. That's a good title, Hollywood polymath, for your autobiography. Just cycling up here in no particular order are images of some of the shows that Ryan has created, written, produced, many of them very interiors forward, interiors as a character in the show. And then we'll, after these cycle through, we'll see some of Ryan's own houses. I mean, I guess the opening question is, are you addicted to design? Are you addicted to making houses? Tell me about, like, has it always been so? Was there a tipping point when you became, like, you know, obviously, one, I don't understand how you run 6,000 shows and still have time to do anything, but you devote an incredible amount of time to collecting, to your homes.
Yeah.
And tell me about the genesis of that and the evolution of your relationship to design.
I've thought a lot about that lately because people have been asking me that question for a while, and I never could land on it, but I think I figured it out, which is I grew up in a very conservative environment. I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I was an altar boy, and I went to Catholic school, and I wore a uniform, and I had a house. My parents had a house that was abutted by a cornfield. So super, super conservative, and I did not have a lot of choices as a child. I was clearly gay from my first whelp, but could not be. And so when I was very, very young, I think the thing that clicked into me, because I had to get up and pretend to be something I was not, my mother said when we bought this new house, you can do anything you want with the room, anything you want. So it was like the first time that I went to a carpet store and the first time that I looked at paint samples at
How old are you at this point?
6 or 7.
Okay.
And my first memory of my life was actually our first house, and my grandmother, who I was very close to, who was French, I had a little sort of room that I think was actually a closet, but 3 sides of it were glass. And on my year of my birth, my grandmother planted forsythia plants. in front of each of these big windows. So I grew up in the spring with this riot of color. So that was my first memory, design something, color something. So anyway, my mother let me do this room, and she really had no idea what she was in for. Because at our paper, the Indianapolis Star, got the Liz Smith gossip column. And almost everything that you see here in my career is based on probably 2 years of my life and my interests, where I would read the Liz Smith column, and she wrote exclusively at that point really about Studio 54, which to me was where all the great people of the world went that I could never be a part of. So my first bedroom at a very young age was a tribute to Studio 54. So I did the car, and I studied it. I studied photographs, and I copied it. And then a year later, I said, I want to, because I really do think I have undiagnosed ADHD. And I said, I want to change it. So my second year, my bedroom was a tribute to Alfred Hitchcock, which really was a tribute to Grace Kelly. That was what I was doing, but I couldn't say that. So there was a color then called Grace Kelly Blue, and I researched that. And so I just did that. Every year I changed my bedroom until I went to high school, and I was always obsessed. And I think it was really a way I couldn't control my environment or what was expected of me as an altar boy. And so that was the way I could express myself, because I couldn't be gay and I couldn't wear color, but I could do that in my private sanctum, and that thing is just carried on through everything I ever did, really.
So, with some of these shows you've created and write, some you produce, how involved are you in the production design aspect of the shows that you create?
That's everything.
That's everything.
I, in some way, think that I touch every buttonhole, every flower, and because when I wanted to go be a film director, and I was accepted to film school here in California, but my parents made too much money where I couldn't get a scholarship, but not enough that they would pay for me to go. So I went to journalism school. Long story short, I ended up here. I started off, I sold the first script I ever wrote to Steven Spielberg, which was crazy. And I only wrote it because of the title. It was called Why Can't I Be Audrey Hepburn? And it was a romantic comedy, and it was very much based on the design of that movie.
Interesting.
But it was a rom-com back when Julia Roberts and Sandra, like that was the thing. It never got made, and then I did a television show, and then that got made, and I realized that show running was like being a director, because you are in charge of the vision of it. So I did, my first show was not very successful. It was called Popular. It was a high school show. It ran for 2 years, but you can kind of see my aesthetic in that starting to come up. The second show I did was called Nip Tuck, and that's really where everything started for me, because long story short, it was set in a plastic surgery clinic. And I didn't really know a lot back in 2002, and they hired me for scale. So I basically was working for free. And I kind of had an idea of the sets, about what I wanted to do, and we had to shoot it in San Diego. And all I remember is I was adamant about the color of the flooring, and I wanted a fish tank behind the doctors in that office. I showed up, and the set designer, I wasn't in charge of any of that then, the studio was, the set designer was so old he had worked on Jezebel. So I walked into this set, and it was like this, and I say this with great affection, it was like a queen exploded onto these sets. It was like candelabras and porcelain, and it made absolutely no sense. So we canceled that day of shooting, and I sent everybody home, and by necessity, I stripped everything out. And then I think we used glass on the surfaces. You can see nothing has changed. And it became a show about minimalism, and it went on the air in a period of like The West Wing and all of that stuff, and Deadwood, and nobody had seen a clean surface and a monochromatic world. And so it became popular right out of the gate, and my career kind of took off, and I was like, oh, if you give someone a vision to aspire, and then people, magazines were writing stories about it and copying it, and I thought, oh, aspiration and inspiration, that's something. And that show, I believe, was only successful because I took things away. That's the only reason why it worked, because nobody had seen anything like that. And then I realized that all the blood popped against a solid blue, and it was just a fascinating experience. And then everything that I've always done has always started with me designing it. Every show has a single color that I'm inspired by. And when you do television, it sounds crazy, but I write it. I get all my people together who I've really worked with for almost 25 years. And we have a meeting, and I have pictures, and I'm like, I am inspired by this one painting. It makes no sense. It has nothing to do with what I wrote, but I want you to know that. And here's the color of the show. And then they go off and they do what's called dream boards, the locations people, the set people, the costume people, and then we come back together, and from there we, as a group, design the show. So it all just starts with one first meeting.
Interesting. And for shows about history, the two feuds, the Halston, are you going for historic verisimilitude? Is there room to play in that space? Because
yes, yeah.
So,
I mean, when I do, I call them biopic things. They're really. I always say we're making a painting, not a photograph. We're inspired by, but of course, so when we did Feud, for example, we had pictures of Joan Crawford's house that Billy Haynes did. Yeah. So that was really easy, because for me, back when I was younger and I had a lot of, before I had kids, Saturdays free. Does anybody remember a store in LA called Dragonette?
Of course.
Okay, so I used to go in there and I would oh my God, this was, Barbara Stanwyck's chair, and I was obsessed with that stuff. So his stuff was very easy to do. But the Betty Davis house, there was no real photographs of it. But I had met her. When I was a young person, I had been writing to her since I was 12. And then I became a journalist, and she said, okay, enough, you can come out. So I actually got to go in her house. And I remember, since there were no photographs, she was an old Yankee, and she believed on pattern on pattern on pattern, and so we copied the ideas of things that I thought she would like. So it's always a mixture. Halston was incredibly well documented, and everything was copied down to the ashtray by Elsa Peretti. We rebuilt the tower where he worked, and the exact color of the terracotta pots, and we spent a lot of time on that. And I think the Capote and the Swans that we just did, an example of my maniacal way, is we found a photograph of the Babe Paley library where there was a lot of scenes. And I think Mark Hampton had done that room. And we had found the exact wallpaper that he did, the drapes and the ceiling, and but they no longer made that pattern. So we paid a great amount of money to have that pattern 3D replicated. And so it was exactly, I think, very, very similar, if not exact, to what existed. But I like that level of attention, because what I find is it really helps the actors. If you can tell them, this is exactly the room, that it looks exactly like the room where Babe Paley sat. Naomi Watts, for example, loved stuff like that, loved. Every actor does. Truman, Capote, Tom, all that stuff was copied.
And are there lessons from your wide-ranging travels through the world of production design that are transferable to private residences, to your private residences, and the way you approach them?
Yeah, I mean, there are, and then I regret them, I will never forget when I did this movie with Julia Roberts and Javier Bardem that was successful, called Eat, Pray, Love, and I had never really traveled, and I went to India, and I came back, and Bali, and went through a Balinese phase, which was disastrous. And I had these wooden statues imported, and half of them had termites, and it was a bad bungle. So I'm inspired by things, I will say, what I've learned to do is I like to go after people that I admire, that I want to learn something. Pam Shamshiri is here. And so when I was doing my house here, Old Ranch Road, it wasn't really working out, and I wanted somebody new to teach me something about contemporary living, because I hadn't really ever done anything with modern furniture, contemporary furniture, not modern, contemporary. So I hired Pam, and I learned so much. That's where I met Ashley, and I got involved in Carpenter's Workshop and became addicted to that. And so I learned something. So now whenever I go into a project, I try and, I'm a student, I'm curious. I want my 3 young boys to learn. So that's always what it is for me. It's like a laboratory of something.
And are they curious? Like,
They are, yeah. I mean, it's interesting, like, with design, how important I think it is and the conversations it can launch. Like when Pam and I were working on Old Ranch Road, I had a Helen Frankenthaler painting that was bright, bright, bright pink. I think it's called Persia. And all of my boys are huge jocks. And when it went up, my eldest said, we're not supposed to have pink if we're boys. And I said, let me tell you something. So we had a big conversation, and now I love the idea that he learned, like, oh, boys can live in pink, something I was never allowed to do. Yeah. And they walk by it, and they have great pride in it, and I've heard him telling his friends about it like that. It's kind of interesting, you know? Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. My parents never put a Frankenthaler in front of me and asked what I thought about it. But I mean, the stories of your childhood are incredible. I'm always like astonished when parents like have the chutzpah to be like, "What? You're gay?" And at 6, she's like taking you to the carpet sample place to like.
But my mother was funny too. Like the thing that I learned not to do is there was a room in the house where it was her newlywed furniture, she called it, which is the things her parents bought her. Sure. And I was not allowed to go into that room. So the second she left that house, I would go into that room. And I would sit on, so with my children, you know, and Pam as a mother too, so we had a lot of conversations about this. You want your kids to live in the room. You don't want them to like feel like they're in a museum. And yes, there's a Frankenthaler, which is rarefied, I get that. But it's a way to teach young people about art and beauty and the things that, you know, that I love, you know.
Did your mother have that Billy Haynes plastic wrap on the furniture?
No, but the furniture, I will never forget it because she called it the Royal Blue Room. It was blue carpeting, and it was a furniture suite, and it was chrysanthemums that were violet and navy. And it was so, like, crazy. And she also went through a colonial furniture phase, so I just, you know, that my brother doesn't remember any of this, but I landed with me.
So, one of your most recent houses, the Neutra, you had a very specific kind of narrative, conceptual framework for what you were trying to do. Can you talk a little bit about coming upon this house, not only with an important modernist architecture history, but a social history, with Tom Ford having owned it, and that house somehow being so central in that early 2000s, I guess, moment of Tom and Gucci. And then you take it and you need to decide, like, what is the story? And you came up with a very specific story. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, Tom is a friend and someone I've loved and admired forever. And Tom has a very specific aesthetic, which of course I love. And that house, he rescued that house, he saved that house. It was in a period of decay. And when I walked in, I have these moments in my life where I'm like, I can't believe I'm in this house. You know, I can't believe it, because when I was just starting out and had no money, I went to those Gucci stores, which were modeled after this house. So it meant something to me. And I purchased that house because I wanted an office. I just started a new deal. But it was I didn't want to do what Tom had done. So my idea was, mid-century houses I think can be very cold and severe, and I wanted it to be contemporary. And I thought the idea was that would be really cool. Was what if you did a tribute to all things mid-century, from 1650, from just throughout the century. So that became the concept of it, and it was really fun because I think the key to anything, be it a show or a house or a room, is if everything is the same, there's nothing. But if things are arguing with each other, that to me is a conflict, and a conflict is a conversation. So that's what that house became. And then, Ashley and I worked on some beautiful Rick Owens pieces, like a skateboard table that weighed 500 pounds, made out of aluminum that was craned in, and a marble dining table. Just also people designers that I admired, that I wanted to pay tribute to. And I was going to use that house for an office, but then it felt like COVID again all over for me, because I was in a beautiful house with somebody at a table alone. So I wanted to learn something else in the story, and I'm like, what do I want to learn about? What have I always wanted to do? I've always wanted to do an Art Deco room. I want to learn about Art Deco. Where did I grow up loving, and the opposite of COVID, surrounded by people and cigarette smoke, and it was the Chateau Marmont. So Andre, who owns that hotel, is a friend of mine. I said, would you ever consider renting out a suite that I could make an office? And he said, no. And then he called me back and he said, okay, but everything you do I get to keep. And I said, okay. So that hotel was built in that Deco period. So I spent 6 months learning everything I could about Deco and Deco rooms and historical Deco furniture, and collecting stuff. And so that's where my office is. And I meet great people in the lobby and have a meal, and then go up and have writers' rooms. So that to me is what environments are. And then, famous people come in that I like to work with, and it launches conversations, and it's just a great kind of experience.
And do each of your homes have a specific? Do you think of them as, is there a through line that goes from the Hans Hofmann studio in Provincetown to Old Ranch to Neutro? What would that through line be? What is Ryan about all of it?
I think they're all like weird stories. They're really weird stories. Like the Old Ranch Road happened because I'm friends with Gwyneth Paltrow, and I went to her house, and I'd never seen it before, where she had an adult wing and a kid wing, and I had just started to have children. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And she found that house for me, that I ended up buying, because it had a similar layout. So when I think of that, I was like, young family, how do you live formally but informally? There was that. I'm working on a farm, and I realized that my children like to plop. So the idea was I wanted to do something with a lot of color, where they could just plop. And my grandmother and I used to raise vegetables and flowers. So I was like, whatever happened to that guy? Where'd he go? He's still in there. I want to get in touch with him again. So that became the story of that place. And sometimes I'm just in a weird, you ask me, how do I do it all? And I will say, it's my hobby. Some people do coke, some people collect cars. I go on first dibs, and that's that. And that's just what it is, So when I'm working...
Why choose?
I know, right? But when I'm working, I like to, I'm on set all day. And for those of you who haven't been on set, it's really, really fucking boring, because you rehearse something and then it takes them an hour to light it. And I work on scripts or I work on design projects, and I love it. And it's a different way of being creative and interesting.
Well, and that's one of the things I find most fascinating about these houses that you do, is there seems to be a roving intelligence, different interests, and the same with the furniture you collect and the art you collect. Are there areas of collecting that, do you go regardless of the house, that you continue to focus on building a collection, or is it as you as you make new stories, you look for things that somehow build that story.
No, what I feel like is what I do is I learn about something, I exhaust that, and then I move on to something else.
Okay.
Like, so that, another example of that is I'm working on a place, I've always been attracted to old master paintings, which, you don't really see younger families living with a lot. But I grew up in a world where, the Rothschilds had, I grew up with that. That was an influence of aspiration. So for the past 3 years, and I have no idea why, I have been collecting, which nobody wants anymore, old master paintings of murders.
Oh.
So, and which are on brand for my work.
Indeed.
And so I had this idea, what if you do a salon? I have this, it has very tall ceilings. So I'm doing a gallery, so you're surrounded by a gallery experience, and I'm calling it Sandals and Scandals. And I've been working with, designers about the contemporary on the bottom, but old world on the top. Pam's beautiful book, she has a house that I was very inspired by. I was like, oh, I like that idea. It's just interesting. It's fresh.
Yeah.
But in my career, when I was really young, Steven Spielberg, who I said bought my first script, gave me one piece of advice that I think I'm implied to my entire life, which is to always do the opposite of what you've just done if you want to keep working. And if you look at Steven's career, it's like Schindler's List, Jurassic Park, you can't get to, always, he was so brilliant at that, because then people don't get tired of you, and you can keep learning and being an artist. So that applies to every part of my life.
I'm curious, did you have a chance to walk around the fair?
I did.
Did anything pop out at you oh, what's that?
Everything.
Everything.
Well, I think I'm a beauty addict. I purchased 2 things before I walked into this room, which is bad. But I just I love beautiful things, and I'm inspired by them. I'm inspired by, I think, the movement that's happening. What I love about this, what Ashley and company have done about this world today, is it's about new visions and young people and seeing things in a different way. And I think so many of us grew up as collectors, not really being able to afford a lot of things because you were told the things to collect were brown antiques.
Right.
I grew up with, well, I could never afford that. But you can see there's beautiful ceramicists and sculptural things, and I like the youth movement that's happening right now.
Is there a holy grail in terms of a piece of architecture or an antique of whatever century? Is there something that, you're like, before I'm done, I'm going to do a Tudor. Before I'm done, I'm going to do a something.
That's interesting. Yes, I've always really been interested in, I don't know why, I've always been interested in Art Nouveau lingeries. The idea of doing a building made out of glass that has some craftsman touch where you can see the hand in it, you can see the pattern in it that is more than 100 years old. I love those things. And, if you go to Paris, they're all still there. Yeah. But they're not here. And there used to be a lot of them. They were all torn down. So I've always been attracted to that just because I think it feels so handmade. And of course, the trick with something like that now is, do something that feels ancient, but surround it with youth and modernism. That to me is powerful. I'm interested in that one day. I don't know where, but
someday you'll find it.
But what I would really be interested in is the researching of who is a young person who could make this glass from a tradition where the people who used to make it were 80 years old, but not anymore. That's cool to me. I like that.
You mentioned you spend a lot of time on First Dibs. Where else do you go to sniff out new talent, to sniff out things that excite you and interest you? Do you go to other fairs? Do you have time for that? In your?
I like I said, when I was a younger person, I would spend Saturdays or Fridays going to Dragonette. I've been going to Blackman Cruise for 30 years. Gallery Half, I love. Future Perfect, I love. Trevor Chaney's store. I went for the first time because it was a bucket list. You know, I think we all have been through this with COVID, where we were stuck. I'm like, I really want to go to TFAF. I really want to go. So I made a whole week of it, and I had always wanted to do it. And we flew to Paris and spent a couple days, and then went to the Netherlands and went to it. And have you been?
I've never done it.
You got to go.
Well, there's always some classier editor who's like, you know, working the Euro scene. And, you know, and now that I live in LA, Condé Nast is like, well, we can give you a middle seat next to the bathroom that you can't upgrade even with your own points. So, yeah, but one of these days I want to do the whole, like, Axel Vervoort fantasy world.
Yeah.
And did you come back from TAFAF with things?
You know, I didn't. What was interesting is I really didn't. I went with two people who the room will probably know, Nate Berkus and Jeremiah Brent, who were friends. And so we just, and my better half, and we just went, and David Caffiero and Joe Sheftel, friend of mine, and we just went, and I really just looked, and I came back very inspired about new things. So it was really like just a clean the cobwebs, sort of like get out of your way and look at life trip.
And speaking of your better half, what part does he play in all of this? Is he like, oh, go do your thing, Ryan, or is he very involved in the things that you collect and live with?
He's very involved, but like at the beginning, he was too involved, you know, for my taste, because and I would just say, stop having opinions. Just stop having opinions. Because and our new deal, which he's very good at, is like, it's like making a show. I'm like, let me produce this. And to do something like that, I think you have to follow a vision. So follow a vision, and our rule as a family is when it's done, anybody can say, I don't like that, and it will be gone. So I think everybody wants to learn as we're doing it, getting enough ammunition to say, I hate that, take it away, but that's never happened once. So he's very good with me in that way, which I'm happy about, you know? It's the older son who has a lot of ideas.
How old is he?
He's 11.
Oh,
Now he's starting to flex, you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there questions from the audience to ask of Ron? Oh, I see a gentleman in the back. Gentleman in the back, in the corner.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
All right. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, that's loud. I guess and this is a question actually, like in most of the projects that I've seen that are your sort of personal homes, it seems that you're sort of inhabiting historical properties that you're kind of like redoing to sort of fit your lifestyle. And has there ever been a sort of interest in contemporary architecture and designing sort of a home from scratch without sort of like a history or a ghost that you're dealing with?
Yeah, I just did that. That literally was finished on Friday. That's the Sandals and Scandals thing. Yeah, and that was fun, and I'll never do it again. Because from the ground up, it is a night. It was hard for me, you know. It was a lot of work. It took 4 years instead of 2. But part of the thing that I love to do is rescuing things and people in history you can see in my work. And the happiest I've been is when I find something that is either fallen into disrepair or is quote unquote important, that's just going to be either leveled or destroy the integrity of it. I like bringing it back to life and saving things. But I did have fun with this new place.
And so it was a ground up.
It was the ground up. I went through 3 architects.
Oh dear.
But it was also like I'm the worst client because I have something in my head that I like, and sometimes that's hard to express, you know. The great collaborations I've had is where I'm like, I feel like, and then they get it, and then they inspire me to add to it and change it.
And it's interesting, you've worked with different terrific designers like
Yeah.
David and Pam and Trevor, and it seems like the art collecting that you do is also sort of, you're interested in one sort of thing,
Yeah.
you move on to
Yeah.
another thing and build a different
Yeah.
and build a different story. So you enjoy, like, you went through 3 architects. I'm not going to ask who they are. Desperate to know. Anyway, let's have another question from the audience. Mallory?
First of all, I'd just love to say thank you, because your incredible work and the beauty of your productions. And, you know, when you do the historic interiors, you know, it's a touchstone for a new generation. You know, it's very, very meaningful what you put into your productions. So thank you. I guess my big question for you is, store it or get rid of it? Like, as you move through your life and these different interiors and these different moments, do you hang on to things or do you let them go?
I let them go. I do let them go. Interestingly enough, I've been giving things away to like, if somebody says, a friend walks by, best thing you can ever say to me is, I really like that. Which reminds, like, I believe in.
I was
What do you
looking
want,
for
sir?
I was looking for the Bertoya and the Fragonard.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, keep.
But I don't, I like to, I like new environments, because I'm just like I'm trying to learn something. But also now I have a large family, so it's not like my better half is an absolute hoarder. And you asked me about our relationship, is like he kind of hems and haws, but then once I finish something, he hates anything changed. And he because I think he's an only child, and I think it was just like, it's a memory that, to me, I'm like, I'm not sentimental about things. I'm not sentimental about art or nothing. I'm much more like, let's keep going, let's keep learning, let's keep moving.
Others in the room? Well, then I'm gonna. Oh, hi.
When you're creating spaces and you're doing something, you said that you like opposites, you know, you like to mix up the different generations of design and art together, and I think that's so interesting to juxtapose emerging alongside established, dead or alive. But will your, let's say, your design hobby, Get Your Yayas Out project be completely in contrast with, say, like if you're doing the Swans, are you doing modernism? Like, is it two sides of your brain? Is it left, right brain, sort of like contemporary, historic?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because that's exactly true. I found that that's like the thing that I'm working on. I want to do the opposite of that in my personal life, you know. And like when I was doing the Swan show, when we were designing that, you know, and it was a lot of incredible, you know, mid-century art and layered textiles and all of that stuff that was in style and that I loved in the 70s. The week that we started that, I read something in the New York Times that said, you know, one trend that's out now in the art world is minimalism. Minimalism is out. And, you know, nothing is ever out. It's just, it's gone out of favor, but it will swing back around. So I started to explore all of those sort of early 2000s minimal painters and artists, and I fell down that wormhole. And, you know, contemporary furniture that was very minimal. And so with my brain, I like to be doing something and learning the opposite always, you know. So my design life follows the opposite. What am I working on now that's interesting? Well, perfect example is I have a show coming out in September, the second season of Monster, that's about the Menendez brothers. So we got, you know, there were crime scene photos of the Menendez brothers houses, which in that sort of late 80s was sort of teetering into like everything was Santa Fe, oatmeal. So in my life, I want your pants. Like I want your blue. I want something that's the opposite of what I'm living in on these sets every day. It's kind of a left brain, right brain way of thinking.
I have a part two.
Yeah.
So, the part two would be, how does that impact what you wear, like your fashion? Do you embody the opposite of which one of the two projects? Like, where does that take you from an aesthetic, personal aesthetic, self-expression point of view?
As you can tell, there's nothing really going on. Like, I wear the same thing every day.
You have a uniform?
I have a uniform. I wear James Pearce black T-shirts. I wear Rick Owens black pants. I have these shoes. I have a black boot, and I have a black jacket. And it never changes. It never. It's always, because everything else in my life is so chaotic that I'm like, I don't want to think about what I'm wearing. I don't want to think about that at all. So that's something that I've learned to just like forget about that, you know. And I think that my passion is much more in, although I love fashion and I feature fashion in my things, but it's never been my thing, really. It's always been interiors and art. Thank you.
Well, there's one. The last question from the lady in the back.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm curious about which historic figure would you like to really meet to pick their brain and learn from? I appreciate all the references to learning and wanting to evolve. And so who's the one that you really would want to meet and why?
God, so many. I play this game all the time.
Okay, dinner party then.
The dinner party game, right? I don't know. Probably one of the great French design crazy kings. You know, there's so many of them. Marie Antoinette, fascinating. You know, somebody who I love her work, and I've only said hello to her across a crowded room, was Sofia Coppola. I love her aesthetic. I love how she's been influenced by things. She's a modern person that I think is really, really, really good. And the last person who I just think is a genius in his work is Paul Thomas Anderson, the director. Like, one of my favorite movies is Phantom Thread, not just for the acting and the clothes, but from the sets. Yeah, and you know, I would. It's sort of bizarre for me to say, but probably that type of person. And then, of course, there's the people I'm learning about now, like all the great like Art Deco designers that I'm like, what was it like to do that and break form and fight? Because you know that was all a fight. Thank you.
Okay, my tuchus is getting numb from the chair. I want to thank Ryan for taking this moment out of a busy life.
Thank you.
Thanks to Ashley and all the Design Miami crew. Enjoy your time here. Bye.